me goodnight, and she loved me. Her favorite way of telling me that she loved me was she'd go into the mother mode. Did you check under the bed? So call 911. Before I called the cops, I'd peeked out, and Amanda was sitting on the front porch. I was like, "Did you get Jersey?" And she'd say, "No, I didn't." It's 911. What's the address of the emergency? It's 608 Southeast 8th.
On the night of November 19th, 2012, Jersey went to sleep in a warm bed. Her little sister curled up beside her, tucked in by people her mother trusted completely. She was 6 years old, just 6, and had already survived more hardship than most adults ever face. She had no way of knowing that she would never wake up in that bed again, and the world had no idea that by the following morning it would be forced to reckon with how badly it had failed one small, bright-eyed girl from Arkansas. Her full name was Jersey Diane Bridgeman. She was born on November 14, 2006. Just 6 days before her death, she had turned 6 years old. She spent her entire short life in Bentonville, Arkansas, a mid-sized city nestled in the northwest corner of the state, in the foothills of the Ozarks. Bentonville is known to most Americans, if at all, as the hometown of Walmart's global headquarters, a clean, growing suburban city with quiet neighborhoods and tree-lined streets. On the surface, it looked like an ideal place to raise a child. For Jersey Bridgeman, that surface hid something much darker. Those who knew Jersey described her the way people always describe children who leave too soon, with a specific, aching tenderness that goes beyond generic praise. She was not simply sweet or precious, though she was both. She was, according to a neighbor quoted in news reports at the time, a little old soul. That phrase, a little old soul, says something important about who Jersey was. She carried a quiet depth in her eyes. She had already learned, at an age when most children are worried about nothing more serious than losing a tooth, that the world could be unkind. And yet, by all accounts, she had not let that knowledge make her fearful or cold. She remained open. She remained trusting. That openness would become the final tragedy of her story. Jersey had a younger sister, approximately 2 years old at the time of her death. The bond between the two girls was close in the way that siblings close in age often are. Instinctive, constant, unquestioned. Jersey, as the older one, took on a quiet protectiveness over her little sister. Their mother, Desiree Bridgeman, was a working single parent, doing her best to hold a household together. She worked late shifts, arriving home after 11 o'clock at night. She leaned on her neighbors for help. That reliance on community, that necessary trust, it was not a flaw. It was the reality of a single mother trying to survive. What happened was not her fault. It is important to say that plainly and early. Before she came to live with her mother, Jersey's early years had already been marked by suffering that no child should ever know. Following her parents' divorce, she had lived with her father, David Bridgeman, and her stepmother, Jana Bridgeman. What unfolded in that home became the subject of a separate, high-profile criminal case in Arkansas. According to court documents and guilty pleas entered by both David and Jana Bridgeman, the couple had chained Jersey to a dresser at night. Their stated reason was to prevent her from wandering and getting into medication. Whatever the stated justification, the act was what it was. A child, restrained like an animal in the home of the two people most responsible for her safety. The case drew widespread outrage across Arkansas and beyond. Both David and Jana Bridgeman eventually pleaded guilty to false imprisonment, permitting abuse of a minor, and endangering the welfare of a child. David received an 18-year prison sentence. Jana received 12 years, plus an additional 3 years for a probation revocation. After the convictions, Jersey was removed from that environment and placed in the custody of her mother, Desiree. It was, by any measure, a second chance, a rescue even. Jersey had been through something terrible, and now she was somewhere safer. She started kindergarten in Bentonville in the fall of 2012, just weeks before her death. Kindergarten. She was learning to read. She was learning to write her name. She was beginning the ordinary, beautiful process of growing up. According to news reports from the time, Jersey was adjusting to her new life with her mother. But she was in a neighborhood surrounded by familiar faces. The woman next door, Amanda Holly, and her husband Zachary were regulars in her daily life. They babysat Jersey and her little sister often. Zachary Holly, in particular, was someone Jersey knew well. He was a grown-up she had been around many times. He had carried her home. He had put her to bed. In the geography of a child's world, he was simply part of the landscape, a neighbor, a familiar presence, a face connected to safety. Think about what kindergarten means. It means show and tell. It means learning the letters of your name, one careful stroke at a time. It means a backpack that is too big for your small shoulders, and shoes with Velcro because laces are still hard. It means a classroom that smells like crayons and graham crackers. Jersey had only just entered that world, and she had only just begun. Her birthday had been 6 days earlier, November 14th, 2012. She had just turned 6. In the ordinary rhythm of a child's life, a birthday is a moment of pure joy. Cake, candles, the giddy awareness that you are 1 year older. Whatever Jersey's 6th birthday looked like, she had no way of knowing it was her last. She had her whole life spread out ahead of her, undefined and full of possibility. The possibility of growing up, of becoming whoever she was going to become, of carrying those dark early years behind her and building something new. On the evening of November 19th, 2012, Desiree came home from work around 11 o'clock at night. Zachary Holly and his wife Amanda had been watching the girls. According to court documents, when Desiree arrived home, both Zachary Holly and Desiree walked the children home together. Zachary carried Jersey. Desiree carried the younger sister. They placed both girls in the same bed. They said goodnight. The door closed. Jersey was asleep. Her sister was asleep beside her. Their mother was home. Everything looked the way it was supposed to look, but something was already in motion that night. Something that no locked door, no loving mother, no fresh start could stop. Because the danger was not outside, it was not a stranger, it was not someone who had slipped through the cracks of a background check or a community watch report. The danger already knew where she slept. There is a particular kind of danger that hides in plain sight, not in darkness, not behind locked doors, not in the face of a stranger who sets off every alarm in your body. In the most devastating danger, the kind that destroys families and haunts communities for decades, wears a familiar face. It waves hello from the front porch. It offers to help. It carries a sleeping child home in its arms. Zachary Holly was that kind of danger, and for a long time, nobody saw it coming. Zachary Holly was born on October 8, 1984, making him 28 years old at the time of Jersey Bridgman's murder in November 2012. He lived next door to the Bridgeman family in Bentonville, Arkansas, with his wife, Amanda Holly. To the outside world, to the neighbors, to Desiree Bridgeman, to anyone who encountered him in the ordinary course of daily life, Zachary Holly presented as a helpful, friendly, unremarkable young man. He and Amanda had made themselves useful to the Bridgeman household. They babysat, they pitched in, they were, on by every surface measure, good neighbors. That image of normalcy is not unusual in cases like this. It is, in fact, one of the most consistent and disturbing patterns in the psychology of those who commit crimes against children. They do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with warning signs written across their foreheads. They build trust methodically, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes with chilling deliberateness, and they use that trust as access. Zachary Holly had access to Jersey Bridgeman because he had spent months making himself indispensable to her mother. What was happening beneath that surface, however, tells a far more complicated and deeply troubling story, one that his defense attorneys would later argue, with some supporting evidence, was never fully told to the jury that sentenced him to death. And according to arguments raised in Holly's post-conviction appeals, there were two significant facts about his background that were reportedly never presented to jurors during his 2015 trial. The first was that Holly had been diagnosed with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD. This is a condition caused by prenatal exposure to alcohol that can result in lasting neurological damage, particularly to the frontal lobe, the region of the brain responsible for impulse control, decision-making, judgment, and the ability to understand consequences. FASD is not a condition that can be developed or faked. It is biological, present from birth, and its effects are lifelong. According to Holly's appellate counsel, Lee Short, the disorder had measurably impaired Holly's executive function, his capacity to plan, to reason, and to regulate his own behavior. The second fact was darker still. According to Short's arguments before the Arkansas Supreme Court, Zachary Holly had reportedly been repeatedly sexually abused by his own brother during childhood, abuse that his legal team described as having devastating consequences on his development. He grew up, according to this account, in an environment where physical and sexual abuse were normalized, where drug use was commonplace, and where a brain already damaged by FASD was absorbing all of it as though it were simply how the world worked. It is critical to be precise here about what this information does and does not mean. It does not excuse what Zachary Holly did. Nothing excuses what Zachary Holly did. A 6-year-old child is dead because of him. Her name was Jersey. She had just started kindergarten. Or the explanation of a traumatic background and a neurological disorder does not diminish that fact by a single degree. What it does do is help us understand the landscape, the conditions under which someone becomes capable of the unthinkable. And that understanding matters, not for mercy, but for clarity, for prevention, for the uncomfortable truth that cycles of abuse do not end themselves. The state, for its part, pushed back firmly on these arguments during Holly's appeals. Prosecutors argued that the crime showed enough deliberate planning to contradict claims of total impulse failure, that Holly had made choices step by step that night. The Arkansas Supreme Court ultimately agreed with the state, upholding the denial of post-conviction relief as recently as April 2026, just weeks before this script was written. When the question of what a jury might have decided had they known about FASD and childhood sexual abuse remains legally unanswered. Morally, it is a question this case will carry forever. What is documented is the picture of a man who appeared, to those around him, entirely functional. He held a domestic life. He had a wife. He participated in the social fabric of his neighborhood. Beverly Engel, executive director of the Children's Advocacy Center of Benton County, noted in press coverage of the case a sobering statistical reality. Roughly 96% of those who offend against children are people the child already knows. Not strangers, not monsters lurking at the edges of a playground. People who have been welcomed in. People who have been trusted. People exactly like Zachary Holly. In the weeks and days leading up to November 19, 2012, nothing in Holly's outward behavior appears to have alarmed anyone. He and Amanda continued their routine. They continued to babysit. He continued to be the neighbor who helped out, who was present, who was woven into the daily life of the family next door. Whatever was building inside him, whatever collision of disorder and damage and impulse was moving toward that night, it left no visible trace that anyone around him detected. On the evening of November 19th, Desiree Bridgeman came home from her late shift and found her daughters at the Holly home, as arranged. Zachary Holly was there. Amanda Holly was there. It was a normal evening. Desiree visited briefly with the couple after arriving home. Then, in a detail that would later be documented in court affidavits and would strike anyone who reads it with a particular chill, Zachary Holly carried Jersey home. He carried her small, sleeping body through the night air, across the short distance between their two houses, and laid her down in bed beside her little sister. He said good night. He went back to his own home. And then, according to prosecutors, sometime after midnight, he came back. The vacant house next door, just 2 doors down from where Jersey slept, directly adjacent to the Holly home, sat empty and unlocked. It was not far. It was, in the terrible logic of what happened next, close enough. Jersey Bridgeman had already survived one nightmare. She had been chained to a dresser by the people who were supposed to protect her most. She had been removed from that house, placed somewhere safer, enrolled in kindergarten, given a second chance at a childhood. She had made it through the worst thing that had happened to her. She was on the other side of it. She had no idea the next nightmare had already crossed the threshold. There is a moment in every tragedy like this one where the world splits into 2 versions of itself, the one that existed before and the one that comes after. For the Bridgeman family, for the neighborhood on that quiet Bentonville street, for everyone who would come to know Jersey's name, that moment arrived in the early hours of November 20th, 2012. It was a Tuesday. It was 6 days after Jersey's 6th birthday, and by the time the sun rose fully over northwest Arkansas that morning, nothing would ever be the same. The evening of November 19th had ended without incident, at least as far as anyone could see. Desiree Bridgeman had come home from her late shift and visited briefly with Zachary and Amanda Holly, and watched as Zachary carried a sleeping Jersey back to her bed. Desiree carried the younger sister. Both girls were tucked in together. The house was settled. The night was quiet. Desiree went to sleep. Prosecutors would later reconstruct, through forensic evidence and investigative work, what they believe happened after that. Sometime after midnight, after Desiree was asleep, after the neighborhood had gone still, Zachary Holly reportedly returned. According to the charges brought against him and the evidence presented at trial, he entered the Bridgeman home, took Jersey from her bed, and carried her to the vacant house next door, a home that sat empty, directly adjacent to the Holly residence, just 2 doors down from where Jersey lived. She was asleep. She was 6 years old. She weighed, in all likelihood, no more than 40 or 50 pounds. She was entirely defenseless. What happened inside that vacant house is documented in court records, medical examiner testimony, and prosecutorial evidence presented during Holly's 2015 trial. Jersey Bridgeman was sexually assaulted. She was then strangled. The medical examiner who testified at trial described the manner of death as asphyxiation. The physical evidence indicated she had been strangled by her own pajama bottoms. Court reporting from the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette noted that the medical examiner demonstrated for the jury, by clawing at his own neck, how Jersey had attempted to free herself during the attack. She fought. A 6-year-old child in the dark, in a strange and empty house, fought for her life with everything she had. That detail must be allowed to land. It must not be rushed past. Jersey Bridgeman fought. She was not passive. She was not simply taken. In her final moments, she resisted. She scratched and clawed and struggled against something far larger and far more powerful than herself. And she lost. Not because she gave up, because she was 6 years old and the odds were insurmountable. But she fought. That matters. That is part of who she was. Her body was found naked in the vacant house. The pajama bottoms she had worn to bed were used as the instrument of her death. She was alone in that empty space when officers discovered her. A small figure in a house that had no furniture, no warmth, no one who loved her nearby. The morning of November 20th began the way terrible mornings often do, with something ordinary going wrong. Desiree Bridgeman woke up and went to check on her daughters. Her younger daughter, approximately 2 years old, was still in the bed where both girls had been placed the night before. Jersey was not. The bed held one child where there should have been 2. Desiree searched the house, the kitchen, the bathroom, every room. Jersey was not there. According to the court document later made public, Desiree then did something that would, in retrospect, carry an unbearable irony. She went next door and asked Zachary Holly to help her look. Zachary Holly agreed to help. He went through the motions. He participated in what appeared to be a search. At some point, the precise sequence documented in investigative reports, Desiree called 911 to report her daughter missing. Bentonville police responded and began searching the immediate area. Officers searched the Bridgeman home. They searched the Holly home. And then, according to reporting on the case, an officer noticed something. The back door of the vacant house nearby was open. Officers entered the vacant home. They found Jersey. The Bentonville Police Department, to their credit, moved quickly. This was not a case that sat cold for weeks or months while evidence degraded. Within hours of the body's discovery, the neighborhood became a crime scene. Investigators understood immediately that what they were dealing with was not an accident, not a random act of violence from an unknown intruder, but something that had happened close, geographically and relationally close, to the child's home. The community's reaction was one of immediate and profound shock. Bentonville is not a city accustomed to crimes of this nature. The case carried an additional layer of raw grief because Jersey was not a stranger to tragedy. The entire state of Arkansas had already followed the story of the chaining abuse case the previous year. People knew her name. People had followed her story when her father and stepmother were convicted. They had, in some collective way, exhaled with relief when she was placed in her mother's custody and began kindergarten. There was a sense, fragile and perhaps naive, but genuinely felt that Jersey had made it through the worst of it. That belief collapsed entirely on the morning of November 20th, 2012. Neighbors gathered. News trucks arrived. The quiet residential street in Bentonville became something it had never been before. A place where something unspeakable had happened. One neighbor, Julie Pickard, told the Associated Press that Zachary Holly had wept the day Jersey's body was found. He stood among the grieving neighbors. He wiped his eyes. He performed the role of a shocked and saddened member of the community with enough conviction that, at least initially, nobody pulled him aside. Detectives, however, were already looking at him. The geography of the crime was too precise to be coincidental. The vacant house was directly adjacent to the Holly home. Jersey had been in the Holly home just hours before her death. The back door of that vacant house was accessible from the Holly property, and Zachary Holly was the last person documented to have had physical contact with Jersey before she disappeared. He had carried her home, laid her in bed, said goodnight. On the day Jersey's body was discovered, investigators interviewed Holly. Well, according to the court document later released, he denied any involvement. He was cooperative. He agreed, without hesitation, to provide a DNA swab. That willingness, that apparent openness, is a detail worth noting, because it was either a miscalculation, an expression of confidence that he had left no trace, or something else entirely. Whatever his reasoning, he handed detectives exactly what they needed. The investigation had begun. The evidence was already speaking. And somewhere in a laboratory, on a cotton swab, was the beginning of the end for Zachary Holly. Jersey Diane Bridgeman, who had survived being chained to a dresser, who had just started kindergarten, who had just turned 6 years old, was gone. And the people of Bentonville, Arkansas, were about to discover that the danger had never been far away, and it had lived right next door. In the hours and days after Jersey Bridgman's body was found, Bentonville detectives worked with a focus and urgency that the case demanded. There was no margin for error here. A 6-year-old child was dead. The crime scene was a residential neighborhood. The suspect pool, by geography and circumstance, was narrow, and somewhere, on a cotton swab voluntarily surrendered by a man who had wept publicly at the news of Jersey's death, was the truth. The Bentonville Police Department led the investigation, with Detective Sergeant Chris Moffitt serving as a key figure in the early documentation of the case. Moffitt's affidavit, later made public as part of court proceedings, laid out the investigative timeline with clinical precision. The sequence of events on the night of November 19th and the morning of November 20th were the statements taken from Desiree Bridgeman, the initial interview with Zachary Holly, and the geographic logic that placed Holly at the center of the investigation from its earliest hours. The physical evidence gathered from the crime scene and from Jersey's body was sent for forensic analysis. DNA is not a fast process. It requires time, laboratory work, careful chain of custody documentation that must survive courtroom scrutiny. Investigators were meticulous. They understood that this case, given its profile and the prior media attention surrounding Jersey's abuse by her father and stepmother, would be watched closely. Every step had to be documented. Every piece of evidence had to be handled with precision. While forensic results were being processed, Bentonville investigators continued building their circumstantial case. The geography spoke loudly. The vacant house where Jersey's body was found sat directly adjacent to the Holly property. There was a clear and documented physical pathway between Holly's home and that vacant house. Holly had been the last person to carry Jersey, to place her in bed, to have physical proximity to the child in the final hours before her disappearance. His wife Amanda had been present earlier in the evening, but investigators focused their attention squarely on Zachary. Then, on November 23rd, 3 days after Jersey's body was found, something significant happened. According to the court affidavit, Zachary Holly called the Bentonville Police Department. He then went a step further. He showed up at the station in person. And what was said in that conversation remains largely redacted in the publicly available court documents. The details of his statement are blacked out in the affidavit. What is known is what happened immediately afterward. Zachary Holly was arrested. He was booked into the Benton County Jail on charges of capital murder, kidnapping, rape, and residential burglary. Whether Holly went to the police station believing he could talk his way out of suspicion, or whether something else drove him there, is not documented in the public record. What is documented is that he walked into a police station 3 days after a 6-year-old girl was murdered, and he walked out in handcuffs. His first court appearance came shortly after his arrest. At that hearing, rape was formally added to his list of charges, and he was ordered held without bond. He was assigned a public defender. He said nothing in court. He sat quietly as the full weight of the charges against him was read aloud in a courtroom in Bentonville, Arkansas. In the Benton County Jail, Holly did not remain physically unharmed. News reports from the time noted that he was attacked by another inmate shortly after his arrival. Jail Captain Chris Sparks acknowledged to the Associated Press that the assault occurred, noting that the other inmates were aware of what Holly was charged with and that the jail would do its best to keep him safe. The attacking inmate, who was being held on a parole violation, faced potential additional charges as a result. The formal trial of Zachary Holly did not begin until May 2015, nearly 2.5 years after Jersey's death. In the American legal system, capital cases move slowly. The stakes are the highest the law allows, and every procedural step carries additional weight when death is a possible outcome. Holly pleaded not guilty to all charges. His defense team prepared to contest the state's case. The prosecution prepared to dismantle that contest with forensic evidence. When the trial began in Benton County, it drew significant press attention. The case had never left the public consciousness, not with Jersey's prior abuse case still fresh in the memory of Arkansans, not with the specific and devastating nature of the crime. The courtroom filled with people who had followed this story from the beginning, people who had learned Jersey's name in 2011 when her father was arrested, and had grieved her death in 2012, and had waited through 2.5 years of legal proceedings for this moment. The forensic evidence presented by prosecutors was described by observers as compelling and comprehensive. DNA evidence connected Zachary Holly directly to the crime. The medical examiner testified about the cause of death, asphyxiation, and demonstrated for the jury in the courtroom how Jersey had fought back against her attacker. That demonstration, a medical professional clawing at his own neck to show a jury what a 6-year-old child had done in her final moments, became one of the most haunting images of the entire trial. The prosecution also presented evidence about the residential burglary charge, the entry into the Bridgeman home to take Jersey from her bed, and built a timeline that placed Holly at the scene with no credible alternative explanation. The geographic proximity, the DNA, the physical evidence from the crime scene, and the documented sequence of events from the night of November 19th all pointed in a single, unambiguous direction. Holly's defense maintained his innocence throughout. His attorneys challenged the state's case and attempted to create reasonable doubt. They did not succeed. On May 20th, 2015, the jury returned its verdict. Zachary Holly was found guilty on all counts: capital murder, kidnapping, rape, and residential burglary. The courtroom received the verdict with the particular silence that descends when something enormous and long anticipated finally arrives. 7 days later, on May 27, 2015, the sentencing phase concluded. The jury imposed the death penalty for the capital murder conviction. Holly also received 2 consecutive life sentences, one for the kidnapping of Jersey, one for her rape, plus an additional 240 months or 20 years for the residential burglary charge. Even if the death sentence were ever overturned on appeal, Zachary Holly would never walk free. The life sentences alone guaranteed that. In the courtroom that day, Jersey's family had waited more than 2 years for this moment. The verdict and sentence did not return Jersey. Nothing could do that. But in the language of the justice system, the only language available, the jury had said her life mattered. It had said what was done to her was the worst thing one human being can do to another. It had said there was a price. Desiree Bridgeman had sat through testimony about the final moments of her daughter's life. She had heard a medical examiner describe, in clinical and then devastatingly human terms, what Jersey had experienced in that vacant house. She had listened to every piece of forensic evidence that reconstructed the night she had come home from work, hugged her daughters, and gone to sleep believing they were safe. The verdict was the end of the trial. It was not the end of the case. Zachary Holly, true to what would become a long pattern of legal filings, immediately began the process of appeal. When a child dies the way Jersey Bridgeman died, the world does not simply move on. It cannot. The case lodges itself into the collective memory of a community, a state, a nation, not as a statistic, not as a headline that fades, but as a wound that reopens every time another child is failed by the systems and people meant to protect them. Jersey's story did not end in that vacant house in Bentonville. It continued in courtrooms, in legislative conversations, in the grief of a mother who had to keep living, and in the conscience of everyone who ever asked how something like this could happen, not once, but twice, to the same little girl. Zachary Holly did not accept his sentence quietly. Almost immediately after the jury imposed the death penalty in May 2015, he began the appellate process that would consume the next decade of legal proceedings in Arkansas. His first avenue was a direct appeal to the Arkansas Supreme Court, which reviewed his conviction and upheld it. The court found no reversible error in the trial proceedings. Holly remained on death row at the Varner Supermax facility in Arkansas, one of 23 people currently awaiting execution in the state. He then pursued post-conviction relief, filing a Rule 37 petition in 2019, arguing that his trial attorneys had provided ineffective counsel. The central claims, as detailed in Part 2 of this documentary, were that his lawyers failed to adequately investigate and present 2 significant mitigating factors to the jury: his diagnosis of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and the documented history of childhood sexual abuse he reportedly suffered at the hands of his own brother. The Benton County Circuit Court denied that petition. Holly appealed that denial to the Arkansas Supreme Court. In April 2026, just weeks before this script was written, The Arkansas Supreme Court issued its ruling on that appeal. The court upheld the lower court's denial of post-conviction relief. The justices found that Holly's original trial counsel had not been ineffective and that the evidence of brain damage and childhood trauma, even had it been presented, would not have been sufficient to overturn the jury's verdict given the overwhelming nature of the state's case in aggravation. Zachary Holly remains on death row. Arkansas has not carried out an execution since April 2017, meaning no execution date has been set for Holly as of this writing. His legal options are narrowing, but they are not yet fully exhausted. His conduct inside the Arkansas prison system has not suggested rehabilitation or remorse. According to records from the Arkansas Department of Corrections, Holly has accumulated multiple disciplinary violations during his years of incarceration, including destruction of property, trafficking and trading, a sexual threat, insolence to staff, and unauthorized use of state property. When these are not the records of a man who has reckoned with what he did, they are the records of a man who continues to cause harm wherever he is placed. For Desiree Bridgeman, there is no appeal process. There is no higher court to petition. There is no procedural mechanism that gives her daughter back. What she has is the aftermath. The particular devastation of being a mother who did everything she could, who worked late shifts to provide, who trusted her neighbors, who tucked her children into bed, and who woke up to find that the world had taken the most precious thing in it from her while she slept. The details of where Desiree is today and how she has rebuilt, or struggled to rebuild, her life are not extensively documented in public reporting. That privacy, if it is chosen, is entirely deserved. A grief of this magnitude does not owe itself to public consumption. What is known is that Jersey's case continued to generate substantial public conversation in Arkansas long after the trial concluded, not only about the murder itself, but about the systemic failures that preceded it. Jersey Bridgeman had been a known victim before she was a murder victim. The state of Arkansas had been aware of her, had prosecuted the people who chained her to a dresser, had removed her from that environment, and placed her somewhere that turned out to be equally dangerous. The question that her case forced into public discourse was one that child welfare advocates had been asking for years. What happens after removal? What monitoring? What follow-up? What ongoing protective infrastructure exists for children who have already been identified as victims of abuse? Beverly Ingle of the Children's Advocacy Center of Benton County spoke to this directly in the immediate aftermath of Jersey's murder, noting that the overwhelming majority of those who harm children are known to them: trusted adults, neighbors, family friends, people embedded in the child's daily world. Jersey's case became a painful illustration of that reality. The danger was not a stranger. It was the man who had carried her home. Arkansas lawmakers and child welfare advocates pointed to Jersey's case in broader conversations about background check requirements, neighbor notification, and the support systems available to single parents who rely on informal childcare arrangements out of economic necessity. Desiree Bridgeman was not negligent. She was a working mother, doing what working mothers do, trusting the community around her because she had no other choice. The system that was supposed to protect Jersey after her removal from her father's home did not adequately account for the possibility that danger could reconstitute itself in a new form, in a new location, wearing a helpful face. Jersey's case also speaks to something broader and harder: the intergenerational transmission of trauma and violence. Zachary Holly, if his appellate attorney's claims are accurate, was himself a victim before he became a perpetrator. He was, reportedly, a child who was abused, who grew up in an environment where violence and exploitation were normalized, whose developing brain was chemically compromised before he ever drew his first breath. None of that is an excuse. All of it is a warning. Every child who is abused and left without adequate intervention, without treatment, without support, is a person whose trajectory has been altered in ways that can ripple outward for decades and generations. Jersey was failed first by her father, then by a system that could not anticipate what lived next door. Zachary Holly was failed by whatever adults were responsible for him long before he ever met the Bridgeman family. This is not a comfortable conclusion. It is not the clean narrative of a monster from nowhere who appeared and destroyed an innocent life. It is something more complicated and more honest. A chain of failures, each link forged by neglect, by poverty, by inadequate systems, by the catastrophic consequences of leaving damaged people without help and vulnerable children without sufficient protection. Jersey Diane Bridgeman was born on November 14, 2006, in Bentonville, Arkansas. She had dark eyes and a quiet depth that made those who knew her call her an old soul. She had survived something that would have broken many adults. She had started kindergarten. She had just turned 6. She had a little sister who was sleeping beside her in the moment she was taken, who will grow up carrying the specific weight of being the child who was in the bed when her sister disappeared. Jersey liked being around people she trusted. She was small, and she was brave, and she was, by every account from those who knew her, genuinely and particularly herself. Not just a child, but a specific child with a specific presence that the people around her felt and remembered. She deserved a mother who could come home from work and find her children safe. She deserved a childhood that matched the one she had only just been given access to: the kindergarten classroom, the backpack, the slow and ordinary miracle of growing up. She deserved decades. She deserved to become whoever she was going to become. The world did not give her that. The people responsible for her safety failed her, not once, but repeatedly, in different forms, wearing different faces. And so Jersey Bridgeman's name became something it should never have had to become: a case, a file number, a Wikipedia entry, a documentary script. But before all of that, before the court dates and the DNA evidence and the death sentence and the appeals, she was a little girl who fought back in the dark, who scratched and clawed and refused to go quietly, who, in her final moments, insisted on herself. Her name was Jersey. She had just turned 6. She had already survived more than she should ever have had to survive. She deserved so much more time. And the world, this loud, distracted, imperfect world, is undeniably, irreparably less bright without her in it.